After much anticipation, Malaysia's 2023 budget has finally been retabled, and there's a lot that's been announced this time around. So to help us unpack and shed some light on this topic, we have our regional co-head of equities research, Anand Pathmakantan, to help us walk through the retabled budget. Okay, so Anand, before we get into the economic side of things, let's maybe kick off with the most important question that the audience wants to find out. And that would be, was the budget good for Malaysian market, Malaysian stocks, and basically for Malaysian investors?
Sure, I think the straight answer from me on that question is yes, it is going to be good for the market. I think we have two reasons for that. So the first reason is because, going into this budget, there were a lot of concerns on the part of investors that the government would have a lot of populist measures, a lot of spending ideas, and to fund that spending ideas, it would come back to the corporate sector for funding, like they did last year with Cukai Makmur, and the year before that with levies on the gloves stocks. The good news is this time around there were no levies on the corporate sector, whether direct or indirect. So corporate profitability will not be impacted by this budget, directly at least. Aside from that, the other positive is the government is very serious about bringing down the budget deficit per their more aggressive budget deficit reduction targets. And that will be good structurally for the corporate sector longer term because it reduces the chances the government will come back to them for money in the future. The second reason is because GST and fuel subsidies were not dealt with in this budget. Now, these are issues which have to be dealt with longer term, but we have always been of the view that this is not the year to do it. The economy is slowing, businesses are suffering, consumers are suffering, and the government has some fiscal leeway from Petronas to help this year in terms of the budget finances.
Sure.
So they should defer this to next year, and that's exactly what they did. There was no mention of GST or fuel subsidies, so there's no disruption to the economy this year.
Okay. Great. Overall, that sounds great for local businesses. I think basically the audience and yours truly. But to dive deeper, are there any stocks in particular that will benefit from this latest budget? Give us three top sectors in your view, as well as your top picks in that respect.
Sure. Three sectors. So the first I would focus on is auto, and this is really the EV story. I think the government is really getting behind developing EV infrastructure in Malaysia and encouraging EV sales. So you saw tax exemptions for both CKD and CBU EV cars being extended by 2 years.
Sure.
I think, if you read the finer details, there's a lot more incentives for CKD EV. And that's really good because that will attract a lot of CKD investment into Malaysia by auto majors around the world to set up distribution or manufacturing plants here. So that's very positive. The two stocks we like there, B Auto and MBM. Second sector, tourism and aviation. So Visit Malaysia year 2025, that's good news. But in the run-up to that, the government is committed to expand both Penang International Airport and Subang Airport. These are two airports which to me, low-hanging fruit. They're bursting at the seams, well above capacity in terms of traffic now. So very good for investment in the country, as well as building capacity for tourism. Right. So the stocks you could play in that sector, MAHB obviously, also Capital A, or Air Asia to many of us. And Getting Malaysia, which is the traditional tourism play for Malaysia. The third sector I would probably focus on is construction. Now there were no big ticket infrastructure projects announced.
Mega projects and all
that. I think that is actually a thing of the past, given that the government is focused on bringing down the budget deficit. But there were sufficient commitments to existing plans for MRT3, some cost reductions there, but that's going ahead, as well as a lot of infrastructure projects in East Malaysia. So for Peninsular Malaysia, a stock like Gamuda and IJM would be what we would look at, especially Gamuda for MRT3. And for East Malaysia, something like Cahaya Mata Sarawak, which has quite a dominant position in both construction and building materials in East Malaysia, would be the stock we would look at.
Right. Well, great. It's good that you said auto EV. You can't really play that directly because of Proton and Perodua, well, basically major players. I think MITI has actually mentioned if they basically can move on some models there, but clearly this will affect MBM. And a few of all the other, basically the what do you call it, the SOE, the products makers of that. And aviation, to be honest, I think Asia X had a pop recently, that one, so I think that's also of interest. Anyway, great. Okay, there was also a mention that there will be a tax on capital gains. Frankly, I think the details is slowly being processed and all that. I think luxury tax was one of that. as well as I think there is capital gains on unlisted tax. What do you think? Will this have any effect on basically general sentiments of the retail traders and small businesses and SMEs, for that matter, right?
Well, it shouldn't. As far as we know, from the structuring of this capital gains tax, it only involves unlisted shares,
Correct.
not listed shares. So many exchanges around the world have taxes on listed shares, but Malaysia is not one of them.
Sure.
And this budget doesn't seem to introduce that yet either. So it'll be, if you are in the unlisted space and you sell your business, recently we had Farm Fresh buying Inside Scoop.
Yeah.
The sellers, Inside Scoop, shareholders, may potentially be subject to capital gains tax in the future under this new ruling. Yeah.
Okay, Anand, stocks aside, let's run through the economic side of things. From a macro perspective, what are some of the key impacts you see potentially happening to our country's debt, as well as spending capacity of the common folk, as well as basically the riot?
Yeah, I think the big picture is the government needs to get its spending under control. It needs to bring the budget deficit down, and it also needs to bring the country's debt level down. So this will entail two things: cutting back spending, which the government has already signaled it's going to do, and the other is raising more revenues, and that means more taxes, whether indirect or direct. Both those things generally, on the face of it, are negative for consumption. Because it means less stimulus and it means less money in the pockets of people and businesses. But this government is trying to balance the playing field a little bit and mitigate the impact to the most vulnerable segments of society, especially B40 and M40. So if you look at the actual budget measures, there was a rebalancing of taxes, where we had tax cuts for the M40, paid for by slight tax increases for the T20. And I think that's a very good way to balance things out, rather than going for unfunded tax cuts, the M40. So I think more measures like that will be coming along in the next couple of years to cushion as much as possible the impact on consumers and businesses from this reduction in overall debt levels for the country.
Looks like we're good to go for 2023. Hopefully this budget will not only benefit our local market, Bursa Malaysia, but also help to ease some of the burden of the rakyat, which we've been experiencing in the past, 2022 as well as past few months. With that said, thank you, Anand, for your time to share with us your thoughts with the recent budget as well as your report. And to everyone else, to all our investors and our viewers, you can get up to date with the news on our Telegram channel, Trade with Maybank. As always, stay ahead, trade smart, and happy investing. Thank you.
Do 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 do.